Hey, Reliability Gang, I'm Jonathan Guiney.
And I'm Brendon Russ, and welcome to Reliability Radio, a JLL production, ReliabilityWeb.com media brand.
So, Brendon, every time we come to one of these conferences, like the IMC here in 2025, great event. And one of the things that continues to be on the top of the subject matter is executive sponsorship.
Whenever you try to do anything within reliability and asset management, you got to make sure that you're going to be supported, or else everything's going to be really short, right? Things are not going to be supported. You're not going to have the resources you needed. It's not going to stick. You're going to be doing nothing but feeling frustrated, banging your head against that wall.
So it's great when you have executive sponsors, right? They help enable, they help drive, they help get to the solution that you intended to drive the organization in the right direction. What about when you don't?
You got to go to ground. You got to build up that case that gets their attention somehow, right? But you got to get it one way or the other.
And a new terminology I just learned about is called executive inaction.
So with us today to help talk about or help kind of explain executive inaction is Nick Haase from MaintainX. How are we doing, Nick?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. How about you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and MaintainX?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the co-founders of MaintainX. We're currently one of the top-rated, fastest-growing companies in the market right now, where we're helping modernize the way that work execution and asset management is done, leading with mobile-first solutions, really focused on enabling frontline teams to get the work done that they need to do.
How did you get into this type of business?
Yeah, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, and the short end of it is that I was really surprised to see how much work was still being done on pen and paper, not just in facilities management, but in asset management, within manufacturing and industrial work, and then it just became a game of like 5 whys. Why are we still doing it on paper? Why do we need to capture this at all? What is this? What is the end goal here? And when you go to like a manufacturing plant or line, it would look like the Jetsons with all this modern equipment and production line, and then it was like the Flintstones the way they were managing it. And so it was like, why is there a disconnect here, and how do we help these organizations become more data driven, and now enable with that data foundation help them leverage AI and other innovative technologies to help them get better and do more with less.
So with our new terminology of the day, executive inaction, it sounds like you got a lot of experience in that space. Why don't you take us through a couple examples?
There's a lot of folks that I work with that I think on the client side and that are really well-intentioned, really smart folks that know their craft, understand what needs to be done, but maybe don't have the agency or the executive support that they need to actually get some of those things done. And these aren't necessarily things that require an immense capital outlay. These are sometimes just frameworks and philosophies they need to endorse. They need some buy-in from and support from leadership. Sometimes it feels like pulling teeth, and a lot of these folks are engineers by trade. They're really, really smart at the actual science of keeping equipment alive, but maybe not so great at understanding interpersonal dynamics and inter-office politics, things like that. And so they really struggle to get the resources that they need from executives. And then I come across other folks who maybe can articulate that, and they have executives that drag their feet, and for one reason or another. And so what I'm seeing a lot of over the past several years, and it's still very much sort of this epidemic, is what I'm calling executive inaction. And that's where you've got executives who are maybe a few years out from retirement that don't want to rock the boat. They want to keep running, things predictably. You've got a lot of folks who are paralyzed by this decision paralysis of like, all this new technology is coming really quickly, and they're not sure, they don't know how to evaluate it and how to determine what happens if something better comes around the corner 6 months later or a year from now. Are we going to regret this? And so they just end up making no decision. They end up pausing it, or they clog it up in these committees that do nothing except debate, and they need consensus to move forward, and they can never get consensus because they're never really talking. They're always talking past each other, or one reason or another. And so it's creating these organizations that these are not mom and pops. Although they're not excluded from this, but it's creating this dynamic where you've got really important critical infrastructure in organizations and companies around us that are running the same way they did 20, 25 years ago, and it's putting their entire organization at risk because they aren't progressing with the times and digitizing things the way they need to. And not just with asset management. I mean, there's it's a cascade effects that happens across their entire digital transformation effort. And I don't think they understand the real, the long-term risk that they're putting their organizations at by this lack of action. And so we were talking about beforehand, it's you got to just do something. Sometimes it's okay to fail. Sometimes it's okay to move forward, have processes in place, but not taking action and not trying new things is a really, really dangerous kind of culture to bake in at your leadership level.
We're trying to motivate a group that's, I'm going to say, stagnated a bit, right? So
Right.
they're kind of stagnated, not out of any like fear
Yeah.
of the future, just
Yeah.
like, the boat's kind of moving,
Right.
right? And meanwhile, the principles of physics are still carrying on, entropy's still happening, right? Wear and tear, everything else, and probably extends a little bit past just maintenance and reliability, just towards operations in general, right? So got some general themes, understanding of you might have some sort of short time mentality in some of your leadership, or just not trying to rock the boat. Maybe they're not the right people, right? So as you kind of bump into this, an organization, how do you deal with that, right? How do you address that? How do you get past that inaction?
It kind of, this comes down to almost a psychology type of play where you have to understand what is it these folks care about. There are a lot of older folks that you'll come across in the reliability industry that have been doing this for 50 years, 40 years. They don't need a shiny new tool to help them, but it comes down to what they want their legacy to be as they earn their retirement and head out. Do they want the place to fall apart, even though they feel needed and they're extremely useful today? How do they want the next generation to be able to leverage all of the things that they've learned, all of the know-how? How do they want to be able to pass the torch and set the next generation up to be successful with that operation? So legacy is a big piece to that. And then I think there's an opportunity, reliability is often looked at as a cost center by many organizations, but I think if you really look at becoming more data driven, it allows you to make reliability a growth center, because there's a lot of wasted capital, a lot of wasted resources that get inefficiently used because you aren't actioning things with a more data driven approach. So that's working capital that you've already got on hand that you can reallocate towards growth, towards other opportunities, if you look at things that way. So you kind of got to figure out where that executive's stuck on and what things they care about, or what those leaders care about, and try to play those heartstrings and figure out what's going to help them, become a little bit more pliable or open-minded towards any action. And it doesn't need to be the action that I'm biased towards necessarily. Just I would like to see some sort of movement there.
So right, wrong, or indifferent, right? We talked about the trains running down the tracks. It's going to go somewhere, whether you like it or not. But, is there an example, like something that you ran into around like how you had to change the hearts and minds of that executive to make that decision?
Yeah. I mean, one that comes to mind right now is, unfortunately for many of these organizations, it takes some sort of catastrophic event that creates an impetus for change. So that can be a safety issue or some sort of other liability that emerges where there's a requirement to change, either from some legislative act, body, or somebody who's in a compliance related division, the government, and those are sometimes very unfortunate circumstances that bring that change upon them. There's an organization we were working with that was running everything pen and paper, clipboard, checklist inspections, and it's created some national headlines around the incidents that have occurred as a result of some of these processes.
Because things are just going unnoticed or untouched.
Yeah. And so that some of those elements, I think, are the unfortunate drivers of change, that if your organization has the ability to withstand those, then you can kind of move past it. But otherwise, it's trying to use those examples in front of executives and say, hey, you don't want to be like X, Y, or Z. You don't want to be like this company. You don't want to be like this. You don't want to wait for this sort of situation to happen. And here's exactly where they were before that happened. And here's where you are. Do you see any commonality? Maybe we can help you kind of at least give you a little bit of a nudge to think about how you're going to avoid that with your current processes.
So we're trying to get past some inaction, right? You can either try to find out what are those things in our heartstrings that we can try to pull lever on, right? So whether that's money or uptime or just getting the nifty ribbon in the hair, right? Or trying to use dramatic examples. Hey, you don't want to have this, right? Yep. You don't want this to happen, or you don't want that to happen. You got to find out whatever that is for your executive. That is, what is that love language for that executive, right? What's going to get them on that first date so that they'll actually march down and actually make some decisions, commit some resources to getting some of this done, right? Yeah.
And I'd say like the third one, and this is generally not the biggest hurdle, because the folks who kind of fall into the data analyst trap are not typically the ones that get held down by illogical inaction. But if you can present a strong data-driven case and showcase, here's where our ROI will look and here's what our numbers currently look like. That usually helps get people past the over the edge that are otherwise stuck.
Do you think there's a complacency by executives that they're kind of just hitting their numbers and they're okay, and there's not just a need to improve or get better or, greater the output of their organization?
Definitely. I think there's some complacency, and I think some of them just grew up in a world where it wasn't as technology driven. It was very much process and engineering focused, and there wasn't this knowledge gap. They don't understand how a lot of this new stuff works, and they haven't, and they're at a position right now at the table where they're afraid to raise their hand and say, hey, what is AI? How does that work? Because they don't want to expose themselves as not knowing that. So some of it is sometimes just the insecurity around not having the knowledge, the foundation that they need, and not really sure where to go and look and ask.
So as we wrap this thing up, what's a piece of advice that you can give out there to the organization as a whole, to the executives, in particular? What do you want to lead the audience with?
Yeah, I would say get to really try to understand from a psychological issue. Take them out for a beer if you can't figure out why are things not moving in the direction that you think they need to be taking, and then kind of set your course from there to try to figure out how, if we were to unblock that, if we were to take that risk away, or we were to put these parameters in place to make sure that it's a pilot that's limited in scope, whatever it is, figure out what it would take to kind of get you to get the ball rolling. Because once you can get positive action going, it snowballs into this really great energy. But you sometimes have to get people that first proof point and do whatever you can to fight tooth and nail to get that first kind of bit of energy and momentum going, and that will help you set the stage for longer term success.
Yeah, removing some of that bureaucracy that you talked about earlier, right? Just make a decision. If the decision isn't right, you can always come back, fail quickly, and redirect where you need to.
Nailed it.
So thank you very much, Nick, for joining us today on Reliability Radio. And for those of you out there, we'll catch you next time.